All right, that moves us into our very second topic of the afternoon. And it is the NFL draft, the top 5 quarterbacks. Simply put, we're going 5-1. We may have differences. In fact, Jake and I did not put our list together at any point here. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with our number 5 pick, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan. Now, why is he the 5th best quarterback in this draft? And he fights with Bo Nix for this spot, in my opinion here. I think that of the top 5, top 6 quarterbacks that we're going to talk about here, I just feel like J.J. McCarthy has the most unknown about the talent of all of them. I feel like he was asked to do the least, despite possibly being able to do more for Michigan because they had such an identity throughout the year with Blake Corum and running that football. So I feel like, there's a lot of talent there that maybe some coaches are going to be keyed in on a little bit more than others. Of course, John Harbaugh getting into the league as well over there in the Chargers, and he will have some things to say, I'm sure, about J.J. McCarthy and the leader that he is. It's going to be interesting, though, to see kind of who values Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy, because those are the ones I feel are really competing in this year's draft. And both Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy feel sort of like the same player as far as what they're able to do and not able to do. Both really feel like fits to the Broncos at 12, the Raiders at 13, the Dolphins at 21. If the Dolphins want to get crazy and get a little cheaper, their cap situation's one of the worst right now, and they're going to have to find some creative ways to alleviate pressure. And I think that maybe deciding that you don't want to pay Tua again and deciding to go with Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy just might be that move. I don't think they'll get a choice of the two. I believe one of the two will be gone by 21, if not both of them. I think that if either of those two players, the Bo Nix or J.J. McCarthy, get into the second round of the draft, that's what makes them a steal for anybody who's looking for even just a solid trade piece, but also a good backup quarterback for just a year or two. I mean, that goes for the 20 to 32 part of the draft there if he gets back to the second half there. What are your thoughts on your 5th spot and then J.J. McCarthy?
Yeah, so I went the opposite route with you. I went for Bo Nix. He's dynamic with his run game. He has a great creation ability. He is 23 years old. I think that's on the older side of quarterbacks in this draft. I think could also be some concerns about the level of competition he played in the Pac-12. He started his career kind of wild, not super consistent. I know these all sound terrible, but right now I'm going to get the good stuff. But he has an ability. He started inconsistent, but then he got a lot more consistent. I think that shows his worth ethic, his ability to develop. And I think teams are going to really value that. And they'll be able to see his growth potential, as they already have seen his growth potential in college. So that's why I have him at number 5.
That's interesting. And I think the big separator for me, for the both of them, which might not be fair when we're talking about the NFL draft, but I am myself. So, I can't change what matters to me the most. Simply put, I feel like Bo Nix had the better team going up against Washington and Michael Penix and DeBoer, all that crew. I feel like Oregon was in a better place to win both of those games, and they weren't able to get it done. And I feel like up and down the roster, Oregon had the most talent. So it was hard for me to put him at top 5 when J.J. McCarthy has done nothing but succeed, and that shows maybe he could have been given a little bit longer of a leash as well. So when I break down the two, but the one difference between those two, and it might matter to a certain head coach, is that Bo Nix is a much bigger quarterback than J.J. McCarthy. All right, that moves us into number 4. A little bit of a disagreement there, but that possibly means we line up pretty similarly throughout. I have, who we just talked about it last, Michael Penix Jr. from Washington. Now, to me, this is the top of the second tier of quarterbacks. Michael Penix Jr. is amazing, has some injury history, is a little bit slight. There's going to certainly be questions, but the upside is immeasurable. And what he was able to do at Washington and all the way to the finals, is incredible. It's a hard ask for any team in Washington, but they were able to get it done. I think that's a big deal. Beat Oregon twice in the same season. Both times, I do believe that Oregon was favored in those matchups. And I'll be honest, it's hard to find a little bit of a position for Michael Penix Jr. I looked hard, and I think that the perfect team for him falls at 8 with the Falcons, if the Falcons decide to stay at 8. And then the Vikings as well, who I'm not sure if they're going to re-sign Kirk yet, and I'm not sure how much money that is and how much money they have. Right now, Justin Jefferson is looking for a new contract and will be the highest paid receiver, probably by a healthy margin, I would imagine. And if the Vikings decide we're going to pay Justin Jefferson and we're going to get cheaper at the quarterback position, I feel like Michael Penix Jr. can do a lot of what the Vikings asked on day one. That's why I feel like he's a value starter for the Vikings. I don't believe that Michael Penix Jr. could fall out of the first round. I do believe that's kind of the cap for the first round is 4, and that's pretty crazy. That would be if a few different quarterbacks started sliding down draft boards. I think Michael Penix Jr. might be the 4th best quarterback, but might have the best year because he might just fall to a team that might be in the best position. So Michael Penix Jr. Now I'm hoping for a lot of success, a lot of injuries, a great comeback story in the college football world, and just ready to put his talents on to the next level and possibly can do it.
Yeah, I had him at 4 too. There were, like you mentioned, the injury concerns, 2 torn ACLs and some shoulder problems, which could be kind of a concern. He's a strong left-hand throwing arm, good field vision. He's a tough competitor, coming back from those injuries. And also, like you said, led Washington to the national championship game. He did come up short, but his ability to lead his team must have earned him at least some respect, and that's why I have him at 4.
Yeah, and they weren't expected to be. Well, probably in the college football playoffs because I talked about earlier, they were kind of expected to lose against Oregon in their conference final. But, of course, winning that game gets in there. And then not expected to win in the first round either, getting it done. And of course, had some help. It wasn't all Michael Penix Jr., but Michael Penix Jr. was the instrument that made the noise. And I think that's why Michael Penix Jr. deserves to be the 4th-ranked quarterback on this list. Moving into number 3, I have Jaden Daniels from LSU. We got a Heisman winner here. We have a few in this. We're going to talk about one at the number 1 spot. Jaden Daniels gives off, and it's not just because he went to LSU, but a little bit of Joe Burrow vibes. And what do I mean by that? Maybe not the game's the exact same, but both of them kind of struggle elsewhere, come into LSU and ball out. And while Jaden Daniels will not have the win-loss record that Joe Burrow did or the success on the field that Burrow did, it was a lot in the same way. And I'll be honest, Jaden Daniels was asked to carry a lot with a rough defense this year. He had some good help on the wide receivers, but who hasn't? We talked about Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix. All of them have special players at the wide receiver position. Jaden Daniels, he was the first to blemish Mizzou's record this year. And it was close game, good game, but it was really the Jaden Daniels show in the 4th quarter that got that game into LSU's favor. And, we could talk about what it did to Mizzou. Of course, their only other loss being to Georgia that year. But, it was a tough loss. He makes all the throws, is a little slim, and hasn't had a long rap sheet of success. But I think this will be the first quarterback that'll be off the board that should be valued more on fit rather than best quarterback available. When I look at this, I think 1 and 2, you go off and you take them immediately. And then when you look at Jaden Daniels and where his skills line up, can you pair him with a great team? Likely, we're going to see him at number 3 at the Patriots. That's just how the quarterbacks work in the NFL draft nowadays. You have to get the quarterback right, and I don't believe Drake May will fall to 2 or fall past 2, and I don't believe Caleb Williams will fall past that number 1 spot there. That means it's going to be interesting to see how Jaden Daniels does, likely as a Patriot.
Yeah, he's my number 3 as well. His draft stock rose just immensely after this year's performance. You mentioned the Heisman. He also won the Manning Award, the Golden Arm Award. He was a college a player of the year. In addition to his arm, he could run. He threw 40 touchdowns, but he also scored 10 rushing touchdowns. He's a dual threat quarterback, and I think teams will definitely value his potential.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, though. The build doesn't quite say NFL, and I think that's the question there. Because he can definitely run. And I've heard some people say he's as close to Lamar Jackson as you're going to find. And it's always funny There's always it's as close to Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson as you're going to find. Interesting how that always happens and always gets somebody a job pretty early in this draft. Now, I believe that we'll see Jaden Daniels in a Patriots uniform next year just because they have the third draft. They need a quarterback. It makes too much sense, right? But the Patriots have had a long history of just being strange. And I believe their board could look different from 20 to 25 teams' boards in the NFL. So Jaden Daniels does have a chance to fall here. I do think this is the first quarterback that could take a little bit of a drop because of just because the Patriots could look a little bit differently. Of course, Belichick's out. That could always be a thing. That moves us on into our number 2 quarterback of this year's draft. That's Drake May, North Carolina Tar Heels. I think what's most special about Drake May is that he really has no weakness, but he's big. He's really big. It's 6'4", 230. I mean, you're talking about a quarterback that would have went first in about any draft from the 60s on. And then just over the last few years, would anybody look at Caleb Williams and say, despite not being 6'4", 230, I'll take Caleb Williams. That's a very new trend. So even 10 years ago, I imagine teams are looking at Drake May as a better quarterback than Caleb Williams. But I think Drake May's going to the Commanders at number 2. I made that clear earlier. However, the Patriots, that's the fit that I see the best for Drake May. If that could ever work out any way, shape, or form, I just see Drake May as a Patriots quarterback. It's cold. He's throwing into the wind. He's got that kind of power. Jaden Daniels is a little bit slim and doesn't really fit that Patriots vibe as much to me. But as I said, likely going to be locked in as the second quarterback taken because, simply put, there's really no huge weakness in Drake May's game.
Yeah, I have him at the second best as well. Like you mentioned, the size. In addition to size, he's mobile. He can kind of run it, and because of his size, he should be able to absorb hits pretty well. I think he has a fantastic upside, and so that's why I have him as second.
Yeah, and like I said, it just fits on the Patriots, but really Caleb Williams and Drake May, they fit on every team in the NFL that wants a quarterback, really, because they're just so special. They have all the tools to make into a great NFL quarterback. That's not to say that we'll be great NFL quarterbacks. There's so much more that goes into that. Coordinators, coaches, who you have around these players, their mental state, and I think that's a big deal going into these final weeks here. That's what's going to be analyzed the most in the public. Last year, you think about Stroud versus Bryce Young and the Wonderlic score and how much that meant. And it turns out it doesn't mean anything because I have listened to several videos of CJ Stroud breaking down football. And let me tell you, you need a PhD to even sit in on that. So I certainly think that way about Drake May. And then moving into our number 1 player, no doubt, it's on everybody's board. It's Caleb Williams.
Yep. And
Caleb Williams out of USC, our other Heisman winner, that was not last year, but the year before. He really is the Mahomes comparison so far. And we've heard that for about 2 years now. Supposed to have all the tools needed, speed, accuracy, power, leverage. All of this is important. All of this is supposedly in the package here. Now, the record this year at USC was not special. I don't know what you would attribute that to, Jake, but when I look at it, it had a lot to do with the defense, but I do believe Caleb Williams could have been better in a few spots. It's hard to nitpick, though, when your team is forced to score 40 and 50 points to win a game night in and night out.
Yeah, it is hard to nitpick, but he was able to get it done. He for the most part, I mean, he was absolutely fantastic this season, and definitely deserving of the number 1 spot.
Yeah, and I think he likely goes to Chicago, and I think that Chicago moves on from Justin Fields. That'll be very interesting to see where he gets his second shot. Yet, this is also a very interesting player because I think he fits best on Washington. I don't know how you feel about that, but the pairing again with the offense, the newly hired offensive coordinator in Washington, the Commanders, it just makes too much sense that would be the angle the Commanders are trying to take. You're just talking about now, how could the Commanders ever fleece that pick from Chicago without just this massive pick, haul that would just set your franchise back if Caleb Williams just happened to not be the player of the franchise. It's an interesting take. I'm asking you, Jake, is there any world where you see Caleb Williams not going first in this draft?
No. No. I think he just has too much upside. You mentioned that comparison to Patrick Mahomes. How can you not want to take a guy that's consistently compared to Patrick Mahomes? I definitely see him going number one, and for good reason.
In certain years, I could see kind of the layout of the draft dictating that he might not, just because, hey, maybe you kind of work out a gentleman's trade and he goes to 2 and you pick your best player. There's some amazing talent. Marvin Harrison Jr. you pick him, you've got a great player for 10, 15 years if he's healthy. Joe Alt, I think the same way. And then Brock Bowers, I believe most people would say the same thing. But Caleb Williams with this year with the quarterbacks, the trade value of Caleb Williams, knowing that the Patriots and the Washington Commanders both need quarterbacks, is astronomical. And I don't think that any team's going to get over that asking hump. If it comes down to time and the Commanders have not worked out a deal, Chicago has not worked out a deal, but they're set on keeping Justin Fields, who has said that he did not unfollow all of Chicago Bears stuff because he doesn't like them or thinks he's leaving. It's because he's tired of seeing football stuff, which, okay. Take that at face value. But we'll just go ahead and say, going into this draft here, I think it's got to be Caleb Williams, because the price for it to be not Caleb Williams is just way too high. All right, and that sends us into our very first break. Thank you so much to listening to The Blake and Jake Show on KCOU 88.1 FM.